So I've worked mental health nursing for several years, and I know that there's a lot in that particular nursing specialty that's very unique to it, that can be very challenging for new nurses that are coming in. Even if you're not a new nurse coming into mental health nursing, like you are a nurse with a lot of experience, there's a lot about it that can be challenging. And so in this video, I'm going to cover some of my top 10 tips that I wish I knew whenever I first got into mental health nursing from the ICU and some of the other stuff that I was doing. But before I get into that, if you're not already subscribed, I want to go ahead and invite you to hit that subscribe button on this channel. I talk about all things related to nurse, nursing student, and of course, nurse life. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I would highly recommend that you make sure you have coming into mental health nursing is make sure you have a good preceptor. This is sometimes overlooked. And I think when you are a nurse with a lot of experience, you might think that it's not as that like a good preceptor is not as valuable as it once was. And to a certain extent, there's there's probably a little bit of truth to that, but still when you're going into a new area where that's very kind of unique, like in and of itself, like there's not really a lot of good kind of crossovers. I think having a good preceptor is really important for just kind of telling you how do you respond, how do you act amongst the patients, what do you do, what do you not do, what do you say, what do you not say. If you have never been very versed in therapeutic communication, like a good preceptor who has a lot of years of mental health experience that can start teaching you about good therapeutic communication. Because here's the deal: therapeutic communication is talked about a lot in nursing school, and it's mentioned a lot in textbooks and all this other stuff. But from personal experience, having done nursing now for as long as I have, most nurses suck at the therapeutic communication. Like, just like I am shocked, or at least most nurses I've been around, okay, so maybe that's just the thing, have not been good at therapeutic communication. And I've seen instances where a patient's situation could be de escalated and the nurse actually ramps things up. In some of these medical floors, you can kind of get away with that to a certain extent, but in the psych facility, like you're more limited in that. Not that you're more limited, it's just that the consequences for poor therapeutic communications is it's a lot more substantial in my experience. The second thing you need to keep in mind is about taking command of your emotions. You're going to see patients say and do some of the most outrageous things you're probably ever going to hear in your life. That's just the case. You're going to go from wanting to laugh to wanting to cry to wanting to be angry. More times than not, it's going to be the wrong emotion for the situation. The thing about psych nursing or being a great mental health nurse is that you're able to control your emotions, because there's going to be some sad times. You are going to hear stories, and patients are going to do things that are going to make you cringe. And being able to separate those emotions and still being able to go home to your families and be able to function is going to be very important. I remember whenever, like some of the stories when I worked, specifically like pediatric mental health, some of the stories I've heard, some of the unfortunate things that you would think a child should never go through, but unfortunately has. And it's like it pulls on you, at least for me, and it'll continue just bothering and eating at you. And so you're going to have to learn how do you manage your emotions? Which this then leads me to my third point, which is that you need to pay attention about your facial gestures, right? And so on top of taking command of your emotions, you're going to need to make sure that your facial gestures do not convey a certain message that you might not necessarily want it to, regardless of what comes out of your mouth. There's a reason why they say, about, what is it, like 80%, 90%, whatever it is of communication is actually nonverbal. That's important for when you're working in a mental health facility where emotions are already kind of like tensions are high, emotions are not very stable. And so a patient saying or doing something, and then your emotions that shows on your face scream something that can upset the patient in one extreme or another. It could be maybe it sends them to a violent rage, or it just sends them like being sad, depressed, crying, or whatever. Regardless of what comes out of your mouth, your facial cues are gonna be pivotal for that. So you need to be paying attention to that, especially if you're the type of person who you wear your emotions on your, let's say, on your sleeve, on your face or whatever. And so like people start like it's easy to see when you're pissed off, when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're just disgusted, or whatever the case may be. You're gonna have to learn how to deal with those facial gestures. The other thing to keep in mind is really about, you need to master therapeutic communication. Therapeutic communication is important, guys. I mean, it is your ability to de escalate situations to prevent therapeutic holds from happening. A lot of that will be based on your therapeutic communication. And so that's just going to be key. I would really encourage you to just continue observing as as you get in there and you're being precepted. Look at what your preceptor is doing. Look at what's working, what's not working, and then just kind of develop and craft your therapeutic communication, because it's going to be an important skill in mental health nursing. And I'll get to about skills here a little bit later on. The fifth point is to make sure that when you listen, that you're not judging. Your job as a mental health nurse goes way beyond just giving medications. A lot of it is going to be functioning as a sounding board for so many of your patients. And so what that means is you're going to need to be able to sit, let the patient talk, get whatever is bothering them off their chest, and regardless of what your own personal and internal bias might be, you're going to need to listen and respond in a non-judgmental manner. The sixth point is really just being careful about when you listen and then the advice that you give. And I say this because in mental health, it's probably one of the specialties of nursing where talking is going to be important, where you will, or you should anyway, will have a lot of opportunities to actually talk to your patients, because you talking, that verbal communication, is very important in terms of the care that you are providing, right? As your patients talking, as they are expressing the concerns that they have, you're going to want to give advice. I think it's going to be a very common kind of like a very common response for some of the things you're going to hear. And it's going to be something that for some people more than others, it's going to be something that you're going to be more inclined to do. And so what I would just caution you on is, when you give advice, whether you shouldn't, I'll leave that alone. But when you give advice, you need to make sure that you understand the entire picture and the entire circumstance of what's going on with that patient. Because while your advice might not necessarily be bad, it might not be good for that patient and their specific situation. The seventh point is to know when to tag in or tag out. I mentioned before about just how the emotions run high in the mental health setting and how patients are going to say things. They are going to do things that will frustrate you. When you're working in an inpatient setting and you're with the same patients day in, day out, because a lot of the patients, especially if they're the younger patients, they are pediatric and adolescent patients, they're going to be there a while. The adult patients, not so much, but the younger patients and even actually geriatric patients can be there a while too. But either way, you're going to be seeing them a lot in like however many shifts that you're doing. And the thing is, as you're talking to them, what you will find out is a lot of them, they get very good at pushing buttons. They know what buttons to push. They could easily start trying to figure out how to get underneath your skin, especially if you look at your pediatric patients that might have been in maybe like the group homes or whatever the case may be. Either way, or even if it's not that, it could just be the adult patient that's having a psychotic break or whatever the case might be. Maybe it's even just you and something about what's going on specifically is just trying to, like, it's sending you over the edge. My point of this is you need to know when to tag out. But the other thing is you also need to know when to tag in. Actually, let me start with the tagging in part because I specifically deal with nurses. That's just, my primary viewers watching this on YouTube tend to be nurses. So talking to you as a nurse, the tagging in part, because I have seen this so many times, because in a lot of these facilities, it's your mental health techs that are going to be doing a lot of the kind of like the patient contacts in terms of just just the length of time that they're spending with the patient is going to be the mental health techs, most likely. If you are watching a situation and you are seeing that your mental health tech is like their buttons are being pushed, they're just getting upset, things are escalating. It could not be I don't want it to seem like I'm picking the mental health techs, but it could also be another nurse even. And you're seeing that things are escalating. It's gradually getting worse and worse and worse. You need to know when, hey, John, I think you need a break. Let me go ahead and tag in. I'll take care of this. Depending on the staffing, maybe go step out, go deal with this other patient right here. Let me take care of this. Or Susie, I think you're struggling right now, or however you want to phrase it, because different things depending on the person, probably needs to be phrased a little differently. But, just knowing when they're reaching their emotional limits, tag in, give them a break to go in, cool down, and while you just kind of take over. That's being proactive, and honestly, that's being a good coworker right there, because one of the things that I have seen in mental health is I've seen good nurses, good techs, whatever. They do things that is so outrageous that it's pretty obvious that like this person was pushed over the edge. Like somebody should have like just been like, tag them in, give them a chance to go de-stress, like take a breather. I mean, I've seen like where it seems like a staff during a whole like almost like body slams a patient. It seems like now, of course, DHS gets reported and all this other stuff. So it was taken care of and there's cameras. But my point is that you need to be able to assess the situation and just be like, okay, it's heating up. Let me go ahead and go tag in. As for the tag out part, when somebody is coming in and they are trying to tag in, fool, you need to tag out. Like, you need to tag out. There's a reason why they're trying to tag in and then come in and give you a chance to leave and go to stretch. They're trying to throw you a lifeline. Take the lifeline. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make you a worse nurse, a worse tech, a worse whatever. It makes you human. And the fact that there's somebody who's caring enough or whatever to come in and want to give you a break, you need to take it. And even just a few minutes of just separating yourself from that patient or that situation can do wonders. So don't be so proud that you don't take the tag and then switch, go take a deep breath, go do whatever you need to do, de-escalate. I don't know, listen to some whatever music, and then you can be refreshed, go back in there and do what you need to do. My 8th point is that you need to make sure you master a mental health nurse's note. So, mental health nursing notes are a little different than a lot of the other specialties. So, if you go to like a medical floor, a lot of times you're more or less focused on kind of like the physiological things going on, the disease process and whatnot. For a lot of nurses, the behavior part is more or less an afterthought. And honestly, for a lot of the patients, it kind of is. You know, there's a reason for that. But in mental health nursing, really a lot of times, like the behavior part, the mental health aspect takes front and center. What was the behavior during the shift? Is the patient attending groups? What was the interactions like? The suicidal risk assessment, appearance, anxiety, just kind of like stuff like that. And so you can start seeing and getting a picture, just like the little nuance that's unique to mental health nursing. And honestly, like every specialty kind of like has their own nuance to like their nursing notes and whatnot. But the other thing to just kind of keep, and just kind of like while I'm on this, is that keep in mind that you're not necessarily ignoring the physical aspects as well, because just because they're in a psych facility doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of issues going on from a disease process. I will get to that here in my last point, but before that, my 9th point is that you need to understand that good teamwork is an absolute must in mental health. I've been in one facility where you had your own individual patients. Even if you had your own individual patients, the patients still interacted in the milieu, right? So the common area. And so it's not like in a, traditional like, med surg, ICU, whatever, where you have your own patient and they pretty much just kind of stayed in their room the entire time. Like these guys, they're walking, they're interacting, a lot of them will spend time in the milieu in and of itself. If you get into a therapeutic hold, you're gonna need multiple people. So you're not just gonna, you're not going to be able to function without the aid of others. I think there are some aspects of like, if you go on a med surge, depending on what the unit is like, where especially if you have a total care and by total care, like you don't have any techs, where you might be functioning by yourself, like predominantly. That is generally not going to be the case in mental health. Another point that I was going to mention by one of the other ways that I've seen in one of the facilities I worked at as mental health nurse was more or less like a team nursing. And so in that, how they had that set up. So let's say there was 16 patients. And so if there were 16 patients, I could have maybe like one or two techs, an LPN, and then I would be then the RN. So the LPN would function as like the quote unquote med nurse. They obviously did a heck of a lot more than, just past meds, but just kind of giving you an example of how they had it. So it would be an RN, an LPN, and then however many techs. And then you, with those 16 patients, it would be everybody's patient. There's no kind of division. And so, like, as the RN and also as the LPN, because you were also a licensed nurse, you would be responsible for all 16 patients. My 10th and final point, and this one honestly is probably one of the most important ones, and it's probably one of the top maybe two or three where if you get nothing else from this is the one that I need you to remember, and that is that this whole losing your skills nonsense is a myth. I've heard this said numerous times, and numerous times actually. And while there are certain skills that you might not do on a regular basis in a lot of mental health floors, keep in mind that there are still plenty of skills that you have to have as a nurse that you are still using in a mental health floor, and a lot of skills that you will develop or sharpen working in mental health that a lot of other nurses are not going to have. One of which that I mentioned already, which is therapeutic communication. A lot of nurses are just suck at this. Psych nurses, from my experience, tend to be a little better at this in general because they want to avoid this constant having to go through holes. So they will find, they're good talkers. They're going to find ways to try to de-escalate the situation. That is one skill. The other thing is like there is this weird kind of thought that patients, for whatever reason, when they go in a mental health facility, that they are not sick in terms of the physical aspect, that all of a sudden they have no physical ailments whatsoever. And guys, that is just not true. Now, obviously, obviously, the patient is not physically as ill as, the sickest patients on a med surg floor who has a drip going on in the ICU where you're titrating drips. That is obvious. But the notion that you don't deal with any physical like ailments or disease process is just not true. I mean, for instance, last time I checked, alcohol detox is a big deal. There's a lot of issues going on from the physical standpoint of trying to detox this patient. I've had situations of seizures start happening, having to deal with and manage diabetes can be very difficult. I have found that a lot of times you can be in a worse situation in a mental health floor because some of these facilities staff the floors like there's nothing going wrong with the patient. And so when you do need something to deal with a patient who's struggling like from a physical disease process standpoint, the facility, it might be difficult to get that while on a typical med surg floor. Some of that stuff would be readily available to you. I mean, I've golly, like I've had patients with Foley's, I on a mental health floor, like I think drains, IVs, even, which you're probably wondering like how does that work if somebody's suicidal? Not well, but that's what this particular facility wanted to do. And so my point of this is that you will obviously lose some skills. You can say that for any nursing specialty where you go from one to the other, Whether it is, you're going to the ICU, you're going to med surg, you're going to the OR, you're going to case management, home health, whatever, you're going to lose, as in lose, like some of your certain skills will be dull, but you're going to sharpen other skills. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment sections below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you very soon in that next video.